Hey everybody, hope you're having a great long weekend. I wanted to talk a little bit today about something that's a little embarrassing, but I think will soon, quite soon, become an embarrassment that we all share. So it's probably time to start normalizing it. Earlier this week, I think it was on Monday, there was a pretty prominent topic trending on Twitter, and that topic was the supposed explosion of some kind of device or fire in the vicinity of the Pentagon in Washington D.C. And upon waking up, I checked Twitter, as I sometimes unfortunately still do, and noticed this story. And I quickly got in touch with my partner, who was going to be in that area, and let her know to keep her eyes peeled and maybe try to avoid the area, if anything, just because traffic was probably going to be snarled. And as I'm saying this to her and I'm looking at the story, I'm saying, well, this is it's kind of a weird one. And there's some little bits and pieces about this, particularly like the visual imagery. I mean, I've been by the Pentagon quite a bit, and it was, it looked somewhat convincing, but not that similar to the buildings in the area. And just something about the framing of the photograph was a bit odd, a bit surreal. But regardless, I was like, yeah, it doesn't really have an area to look out for. So, I mean, who knows? It's Twitter. just have the information and see, if you can check Google Maps or whatever, and just kind of put it out there. And as you guys may or may not know, what had happened here was I had seen a Twitter story that was being, at the time shared by quite a few relatively authoritative sources, authoritative accounts, right? News, basically accounts that break news on a regular basis and are seen to be trustworthy and reliable. And I had, as they had, kind of gotten fooled by this, and let's say briefly fooled. I mean, I think I told her back pretty quickly and said, I don't think this is really adding up. But anyway, keep your eyes peeled, but I think this might be a fake thing. Regardless, what's interesting about this, and as I sort of did the post-mortem on it the other day, and the story I'll put up on the screen here, kind of became more and more publicly debunked, and sort of the chain of events of what had happened became known. And news agencies were doing their own post-mortem on what had gone down. The interesting thing about this, in my opinion, right, is that I'm an expert, right, quote unquote, on disinformation. I did part of my doctoral dissertation on Russian disinformation in 2016, in the 2016 presidential election. I'll link that article, that peer-reviewed article, in the description of this video. And that's not to say that I'm infallible. Obviously, I'm not, right? But what's interesting to me about this situation is that it did fool me. As someone who works in artificial intelligence, who trains large language models, who works with computer vision models, who's very familiar with the tools as they exist now, I fell for it, right? And I think what this made me realize was we're all going to fall for it. Our reliance on people's media literacy, our reliance on people's intelligence and assessment, individual assessment, if there's a non-zero chance that somebody who's studied this for a decade, right, and who works in this field, if there's a non-zero chance that person is going to get fooled by one of these stories, even if it is early in the morning and whatever, they're not thinking clearly. I mean, that's enough, right? That's enough to indicate that we, I think, are not going to teach our social communities out of this problem, because if I'm going to fall for it some of the time, I'm putting that expectation on my mom or a 8-year-old on YouTube. I mean, there's no way that we can expect people's sort of critical thinking abilities to keep up with this technology, especially when you have to start to imagine where are we going to be in terms of fake stories like this a year from now. I think it's not unimaginable to think of a world a year from now or 2 years from now where it's not a picture of a fire by the Pentagon. It's a full-blown, deep-faked reporter with all the accoutrement that we would come to expect from a CNN broadcast or Fox News. Well, let's say a CNBC broadcast, something from what we would consider to be pretty legitimate media, BBC, something like that. And this will be a person talking to you about the event that they're witnessing, which is, behind them, or there's an accompanying video or still of that thing happening. So I think the big takeaway for me is we just have to stop. This is a corporate social responsibility problem for social media companies at this point. They're the ones that have the access to the data. They're the ones that have the access to the graphs of how the information moves around their networks. They're the ones with the teams of highly paid data engineers and machine learning engineers and statisticians and analysts who are watching these things happen, right? And there's no way that we can continue to expect, despite our highly individual society, a society that prioritizes the individual's ability and agency. This is not a problem that's compatible, I think, with those expectations. We need to stop thinking about this as something we can put on the individual, and we have to be more aware of the work that these social media companies aren't doing to protect us and to protect their political communities that they rely on for revenue. We have to be more aware of the work that they're not doing to uphold that social responsibility that they have. And I think, to take this from just being critical to something a little bit more concrete, the two ideas that I have briefly, and I've talked about these a bit before, and I'll elaborate on them in the future as well. And I'm sure that there are other approaches that can be taken. But the first is, and I've made a video about this previously that I'll link here. I do think, as much as it pains me to say it, Elon Musk is right that there has to be some process by which we integrate humanity checks at a real rigorous level into these social networks, right? We have to find a way, I don't know that the blue check mark system is the way to do this, but what Elon has intimated, I think, and again, I've talked about this previously. I think this is more, a broken clock is right twice a day kind of a phenomenon. But what he's sort of suggested is, because of the, and I'm giving him a lot of credit here, but because of the adversarial nature of disinformation, we have to have a system in which people are confirmed to be behind nodes in the system, especially really important nodes in the system, because we can't keep up with our adversaries in this sort of space, because anything you use to train a machine learning model to measure disinformation or to measure bot activity or measure, is this account a cyborg run by a nation state out of St. Petersburg or something like that. All of those features that you're going to use to make those assessments will eventually be learned inductively from your counterpart, right? And so they'll say, well, we need to have more diversity in the way we structure the language, or we need our reposting frequency to go down or up or be more random, right? All these things can be varied, and then your models no longer perform as well as they did before. So I don't think we're necessarily going to machine learn our way out of a lot of this stuff. And what Elon has sort of started to suggest, and I think this is partly obviously driven by his desire to make more money for his overpayment of Twitter. He wants Twitter to turn more of a profit. So I don't think he's saying this out of some, like a real even understanding of the problem, right? I think he's heard this from his engineers, and he's also fired a lot of these people who would be doing this work anyway. So it's a complex thing when you're saying, Elon might be right about something, and believe me, I'm aware of that. But what he is getting at, and maybe getting at through an odd pathway, an odd reasoning pathway, is we need a way of assuring ourselves that a lot of these nodes are in fact people, and that they will in fact generate and process information in a human way. So that's the first part of it, is making sure that, especially for key nodes in the system, and I'll talk about what I mean by that in a minute, we have for sure human beings running those accounts or behind those accounts. The second idea I have is a little more inchoate, but it's something that came out of a talk I gave last week, which is we often find ourselves, especially in the United States, dealing with this problem of recommendations, right? We want to, you can think about Trump and disinformation he spread during the pandemic, right? He was really seen as a key node in this sort of disinformation graph, because he would retweet things, or he would generate information about, about the pandemic that just wasn't correct. Really created a lot of problems because he had a lot of degree centrality in the graph. He had a lot of people who followed him essentially, and so I think there's this constant refrain of like, well, we want to stop this from happening, this kind of disinformation or hate speech or whatever it might be, violent rhetoric, but we also have freedom of speech, and we don't want to neuter that constitutional right, that human right, and I'm certainly sympathetic to that as anybody would be. What I think is important to remember is that while we do have freedom of speech, we do not have a consequent freedom to a megaphone for that speech. And so what I've started to think about more and more with disinformation in particular is what these social media companies need to be doing is looking at the degree centrality, the eigenvector centrality, the ways in which we measure the importance of nodes in the graph and use that to kind of triage, okay, where are we going to really devote our efforts? And how are we going to, given the say the degree centrality of a node in a graph, how do we make sure that when that node is retweeting or tweeting or generating in any way something that could come across as violating our terms of use or generating hate speech or saying something about a vaccine that isn't backed by science, right? It's not necessarily that we need to delete that information. I think in the context of disinformation and thinking about how it spreads virally through a knowledge graph, it's just as important to think about, is there a way to simply slow recommendations, right? To remove some of that megaphone from that type of information. And I think that does not violate in the same way our principles around free speech, right? Because what we're doing with social media is we tend to think about it in a black and white context when really what creates a lot of these problems isn't that the information exists, it's that it goes viral, right? In particular, it goes viral within certain communities and really takes off, and that happens, we've seen in the literature, that happens more readily when nodes with high eigenvector centrality, with high degree centrality, you can think about nodes in a graph that are extremely influential when those nodes pick up on a certain piece of disinformation. So to tie it back again to this Pentagon story, right, what happened here was essentially an escalation of validity for the sources that were spreading this. It started, I think, on a Telegram channel in Russia, and then an Indian news source picked it up, and then an American news source picked it up, right? So these trusted sources really are critical information drivers in the system, and that's where the social media companies have to be, devoting a ton of their time and effort to, is this thing actually happening, or however it might violate the things that we want to define our the ways we communicate, right? We understand that in, open pluralistic societies, we tend to kind of come to this conclusion that we are tolerant, right? And we also know from scholars of philosophy of science and other subjects like Karl Popper, that there is a paradox of tolerance, right? That we have to we can tolerate everything but those who are intolerant of tolerance, right? We have to say, okay, if your beliefs are literally grounded in wanting to destroy a tolerant, open, pluralistic society, we can't let you say those things, but we kind of have to let you say whatever else, right? So these are well-known ideas in political science and the philosophy of science, and I think implementing them in the social media graphs and the way these information graphs work is going to become incredibly. It's already incredibly important. It was important in 2016 when I wrote my dissertation. But it's even more important now because the technology, these deep neural network technologies, are going to increasingly make it impossible for the individual to do the assessment, right? That's no longer going to be something we can expect of people. So we have to get really serious, I think, at this point about what our expectations are around the companies that run these graphs, right? They're the only ones who are going to be able to have the sophistication and, frankly, the scientists on staff to be able to do this kind of information mediation. And so that, I think, again, comes back to how do we confirm that key nodes are human, and then how do we, as information spreads around that graph, If we find it to be problematic, if it violates the terms of service, or if it qualifies as disinformation or misinformation, how do we slow the spread of it? We don't have to, delete somebody's video or delete somebody's tweet, but we don't have to give them a megaphone either. So that's I think all I wanted to say on it today. I'm, again, as always, really curious for your thoughts on these topics, and look forward to reading your comments. Thanks again for watching.